Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very special episode of Tghat Forum for International Women's Day. And we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Feven Teclehaimanot, who is a clinical psychologist, and she's in Tigray at the moment. So please bear with us if we have any connectivity problems. We're doing what we can. And Feven is absolutely amazing, and the things that she's going to tell you today are difficult to hear, but really important to hear. So I'm so glad that we can have the opportunity to share this episode. Feven has spent 6 months delivering crucial psychosocial support for survivors of genocidal rape and other forms of sexual attack across northwestern and central Tigray. All the more amazing, obviously, is that she did this under conditions of conflict, so at great risk to herself as well. And she's had over 300 patients in that time, from a wide variety of backgrounds, but I'll leave that to Feven to tell you more about. She's been actively working with these survivors on reducing the long-term impact of this attack and has been compiling her findings into a book, which we will hopefully see in the not too distant future. So I'll hand over to you, Feven. If you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in this voluntary study.
Okay, thank you for having me, Chessie. My name is Feven Teclehaimanot, and I'm a clinical psychologist lecturer. I've been working at Mekelle University for about 3 years now. And after the genocidal war started, I had the privilege to go to the central and northwestern Tigray, around 20 rural and urban areas. And I had the privilege to see people who survived different sorts of atrocities, and mainly the genocidal rape. So I was going to the 20 places, I can mention some, where the Eritrean troops were based in. And I was able to see around 307 patients who survived many kinds of atrocities, like I mentioned, but mainly genocidal rape. So I was able to provide a psychosocial support for the patients who survived those sorts of atrocities, and as I told you, mainly the genocidal rape. How I get involved is after the war breaks out, I was working at IDER. It's a teaching hospital. So the university has a health science campus, and that's where I work. And some cases, mainly the genocidal rape survivors, was able to come to IDER in the hospital that I was working. And I was seeing these patients survive a brutal sexual assault, brutal sexual violence, different sorts of rapes and additional atrocities also, like physical violence, torture, and a lot of things. So I decided that I had to go to the places where the survivors are, because mainly, relatively, Mekelle was all right. So I decided that I have to go there and I have to provide home-to-home psychosocial support for the survivors. So that's how I decided and went to provide a psychosocial support in the places in the central and northwestern Tigray that I mentioned earlier.
I mean, that's amazing and so wonderful that you took that upon yourself to do that. Can you tell us a little bit about what the victims that you and the survivors that you've met, what they survived? Because we know that rape in war comes in many different forms, and we know that there's a lot of specifically genocidal rape in this war, but other forms of sexual attack as well. And can you just tell us a little bit about what the people you've met, what they've been through, what they've suffered, and how you saw that in your study?
Yeah. No one, not only me, but no one in Tigray expected that this would happen, really. The level of the atrocity that the genocidal survivors faced was, I mean, I cannot only express it with words. It's really devastating. It's really painful, because you wouldn't think that any human would do such a thing to another human, really. And the type of the genocidal rape, the reason that we're calling it genocidal rape is it's not only a sexual violence, it wasn't only a rape, but it has some characteristics that can define it. We can only describe it as genocidal. And One of the characteristics was from the patient speaking. I'm speaking from my survivor's story. I had from around 16, the maximum I think is 16 Eritrean troops, ENDF, the Ethiopian National Defense Force, and then Amhara forces also. For one woman, from one soldier or a troop or any force up to 16 soldiers. And my first patient around Dago was a survivor who was raped by 14 soldiers at one time in front of her two children. And while they were raping her, they make the little child stand there. He is about 12 years old. And while they were alternately raping her, they put their genitals out, they show it to the kid, and they say that we're only gonna do this once, but you will remember this for the rest of your life. We want to destroy you, your mind, and everything. So the first one is gang rape. So up to 16 soldiers for one woman. I wondered how anyone could do after, if 16, there is the first one and the second and the third. So up to 16, they didn't mind. They alternately did it. And while they did it, they used different sorts of physical violence. Many women of survivor Tigray, the genocide rape, they suffered from a physical violence, torture, and also very degrading and dehumanizing ethnic-based verbal abuse. So they used to call them the names that, I don't know, in the history, there was such kind of names that was like a slur, verbal ethnic slur that some kings and someone used to represent the Tigrans. So those soldiers, troops in the different Amhara forces, they used to use that word so as to hurt purposely the patients so that they don't forget the violence. So as I told you, the first characteristic was rape from one soldier, from one troop, from one Amhara force until up to 16 soldiers for one woman. That was the first characteristic. The second one is, I think this is the first one in the whole world, because I've been reading about, I've been seeing views, literatures, I've been seeing a lot of researches, and I didn't find that in any places where the genocide was committed, like Rwanda in different areas, not different sources committed sexual violence to one woman together. So what happened in Tigray was, for example, the Eritrean troop together with the ENDF, the Ethiopian National Troop, or with the Amhara forces together, by just exchanging, by doing it alternately, they used to rape one woman. So I think this is a new one. I included it in the book, and the new thing that I find in Tigray is that many soldiers and troops together, that means Eritrea is, it's a neighbor country. So the neighbor country soldiers or troops were raping women with the Ethiopian National Defense Force and the Amhara and different forces together. So this is the second one found in my experience in the survivors of the genocidal rape. The third one is raping children. I was so devastated to see a patient, a survivor who was only 8, and she didn't survive. She died because of the sexual violence that she survived. And before I see this patient, the patient that I saw in Chern was 11 years old, and I was so hurt. I couldn't. I don't know how it's even possible, but then I saw 8 years old, and she didn't even survive. So not only women were the survivor of the sexual violence in Tigray, but also children. If you're only a female in Tigray, a Tigray female, that was enough for the perpetrators. So I had a patient starting from 8 years old until 75 years old. So they raped children, they raped adolescents, they raped women and ladies, and they even raped elders until 75 years old. And while they were doing it, it wasn't sexual pleasure. And they themselves claimed that for the survivors. And the survivors, when they were testimony, when they were telling me their history and everything, they say that the reason that they are raping, it's not for sexual pleasure. They even say specifically they don't even like to any sexual contact with any Tigray. The reason they are doing is because they want to destroy them. One, by just, I don't know how to say this, by when someone wants to give you your bloodline, they just raping you so that you'll be pregnant, and then the Tigrayan bloodline will end. So the one thing that they were claiming was want to cleanse the Tigrayans by just raping their women, starting from children up to the elders, and then make them pregnant their own blood. So then the survivor cannot be fully Tigrayan. So children's, they were raped, elders, they were raped. And in the culture that we here in Ethiopia, and especially in Tigray, many things are really, there are such kind of norms, values, and cultural rules that, you know, we tend to control ourselves with, and you don't even talk to an elder disrespectfully. And these troops, soldiers in Amhara and different places, they were raping them publicly, gang raped, and it was really devastating. So the third characteristic that I saw was raping any woman in any age, starting from children up to elders. So that was one characteristic. The fourth one is raping women and children, everyone in any age, Tigrayan female. They were raping them publicly. So when they did that, there's this concept we call in psychology appetitive aggression. They were so fascinated by doing the public gang rape. So Tigrayan women, they were raped everywhere, in the street, in a church, in mosques. No place were protective for any Tigrayans. Not only their age, even any place. I mean, in Ethiopia, as I'm speaking from my survivors' report, they say that they would be very disturbed if any guy spoke to them in the street, because that's culturally inappropriate. And can you imagine when you grow up in a culture that no man was allowed to speak to you inappropriately, like a sexual assault? And then this war, the genocidal war, the perpetrators, they were raping them publicly, gang raped. And as I told you, there was this patient in Addis that I saw, and I will never forget her. She was at the church Sunday, always. The survivor, she used to go to the church with her mother, aunt, and the neighbors. And while she was leaving from the church, the Eritrean troops waited her at the door of the church. They raped her watching, her mother including, her aunt including, and any person who was in the church was watching it. And they raped her, 3 Eritrean troops, in front of everyone. So this is the other thing that the survivors was giving a testimony for. So the first one was the publicly raping other people. And the fifth one is raping survivors in front of their families, friends, neighbors, and any community members. But what is different is, raping a woman in front of her own father and mother, her own husband, anyone who is close to her. And I don't know, this is very difficult to witness, to talk about it. I mean, this is not normal. And the survivors of the sexual violence were claiming that they were raped in front of their father, in front of their mother, in front of their children, and everyone who is close to them. This is the other characteristic. And I think the other one is letting someone who is close to the survivor to rape them. For example, like her brother, her father, or anyone, her uncle who is close to her. So the other one is, I told you, letting the survivors to be raped by their own father, by their own brother, by their own uncle, or anyone who is close to them. And it was really, I don't know how to express it really. I mean, being raped by your own father, by your own brother, by your own uncle. It was the most inhuman thing that anyone can in the whole world that we are living. So the other thing was, the other characteristic is what the survivor claimed, that means the perpetrators were using dehumanizing, very degrading, and ethnic-based slurs, like they were surviving a verbal abuse with the genocide that they survived. So I don't know how to say it in English, but it really makes in Haringa, in Tigray. And, you know, it's very common, especially the Eritrean troops use it, and it's called, I don't know how to say it in English, in Tigray, it is Hasadagame. And they used to rape the woman saying Hasadagame, Hasadagame, in Hasagame. They used to call them like they're very dirty because they're Koreans and everything. So the other characteristic that the survivor claiming is the patients, the perpetrators were using very degrading and ethnic-based slurs, and they were also surviving a verbal abuse, with in addition to the genocidal rape. I don't know if there is if something is left, because there are a lot of characteristics. The book contains it has all the contents that the characteristics what the patients claimed by their own words. And I think if I miss something, anyone can read the book and, you know, see there that I didn't mention, I think. But if I come up with other characteristics, I think I can mention her.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I know that was difficult for you to have to relive as well, but it's really important to give, you know, voice and to give body to these testimonies, so we can really understand that these are lives, these are people. And yeah, that was painful to hear, but thank you for sharing it. And I think it just really brings home how we know we have these physical damages to women's bodies, and we know we have these immense psychological traumas, but it's really a whole community trauma as well when you think about the long-term impacts of having witnessed that about your family, or having had to partake in that. It's not just something that these women who have survived have to deal with alone. It's something for the whole community to recover from, and to recognize that this trauma isn't just about one person against another. It's a whole body. So thank you for sharing that. And we talked a little bit at the beginning about your work on the psychosocial impact left on survivors. And I wondered if you could just tell us a bit more about the work that you did with them, and explain, if you would, for the audience, what that psychosocial, what that phrase means tangibly in the work that you've done. Thank you.
Yeah. The psychosocial impacts it left on them, I mean, anyone can only imagine what kind of psychosocial impact it left to survive a genocide with such characteristics that I've been mentioning. Psychosocial it's all about the psychological and also social aspect or consequences of something that you survived or happened to you. So psychologically, if I say anything related to psychological, it's about someone's behavior, someone's feeling. And when I say social, it's about the social relationship you have with other people. And psychosocial in general is about people's thinking, cognition, that means feeling. It's about their behavior and everything. And when we add a social on it, then it's about the relationship you have with other people. So when we see the psychosocial impact that the patients survive because of the genocide, rape, and other national atrocities that they survived, the first one that I would mention is PTSD. So many survivors of genocidal rape, any additional atrocities with the genocidal rape, is they were struggling with PTSD symptoms. When I say PTSD, it means post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a sort of disorder where someone experience or struggle with after they survive a very traumatic event. So what I've been noticing and just giving a support from all of my patients relatively was PTSD symptoms, at least for a while. And some, they were after the support, with family support, with any additional things, they were feeling better. But some were struggling after even I left here. I couldn't continue for some reason, because it was really risky to keep providing the psychosocial support, because the Eritrean troops, they were murdering anyone, even who has a license to give a support or anything. So we had really, at the end, especially at June, we really had a very difficult time to keep doing what we were doing. And for that, I couldn't continue the psychosocial support that I started. So for that reason, even some patients, until I leave, they were struggling with PTSD. And what really PTSD is, it means post-traumatic stress disorder. After someone survives such an atrocity or a traumatic event, they usually develop mainly three symptoms. The first one is re-experiencing. So most of them, it might be at daytime, it might be at nighttime. They feel like they were being raped again. So they have, for example, they have flashbacks about the event, and they feel like that it's happening right then when they have the symptom. That means, so some were struggling with re-experiencing symptoms. uh, Children's, they have nightmares, so at night they remember what happened to them. They have flashbacks and nightmares about what happened to their mama, what happened to their sister, and everything. So the first thing that they were struggling with, most of my survivor patients were re-experiencing what they experienced because of the genocide or rape or any atrocity that they survived. The second symptom was avoidance. So they will try to avoid, it might be the thought, it might be the feeling, it might be something that remind them the event that happened, the traumatic event, the genocide or rape, the atrocity that they survived. So they try to avoid it. It might be people, for example, most of my patients, they don't want to see any soldier or troop or their car or anything related to the person represent the soldier or atrocity, the troops or the Amharan different forces. So most of my patients, they dissociate when they see, I don't know how you say it in English, the car the soldiers have, the troops have in the battlefield. So they used to drive these cars around all the places that they were in, especially the Eritrean troops and the ENDF, the Ethiopian National Defense Force. They have cars that they used to, use even in the cities around the community and everywhere. So after they survive the genocide or rape and atrocities, like I mentioned earlier, they avoid the car, they avoid anyone who wears the uniform of the Eritrean troops or the Ethiopian National Defense Force. So the other thing that they were struggling was, if they are faced with any reminder with a soldier with a uniform, their car or anything, then they will have a very difficult time. So they try to avoid it. They even try to avoid it from their thoughts. They don't want to remember. So when something reminds of them the trauma, their thoughts continue and it provoke an emotion or a feeling. So they try to avoid it. The second symptom was avoidance. And children's, I remember this kid that I told you earlier, who his mama survived a very difficult, and I don't know how to express it. There were 14 of them, and he was witnessing when every soldier, every Eritrean troop were raping his mama. So after that, it might be even at the middle of the night. She said, the mother claims, even in the middle of the night, if there is anything that reminds of him the trauma that happened to his mama, he will run away without stopping. She said he doesn't stop. He doesn't get afraid to just, run away from the reminder. Like usually the Eritrean troops were around their village. So he was forced to see every troop with the same uniform that, the perpetrators that committed the genocide or rape to his mother. So every time he's faced with a reminder, he runs away and he doesn't stop. So the second is avoidance. And the third one is being hyperarousal. So after the assault, after the violence, after the genocidal rape and the other atrocities, the survivors survived. They get really easily startled. For example, when the mothers told me, they say that if they, for example, drop a fork or a spoon, they will get really shocked because of the voices, the little voices that the drops make when they throw, I don't know, a fork or a spoon. The voice is not that disturbing, and you don't run or anything because of a spoon's or a fork's voice. But the mothers, they were struggling because it's really it provoked this really high and elevated emotion because of the genocidal rape they survived. So even a spoon or a fork's voice, it really disturbed them, and they get really startled easily. So they were struggling with different sorts of elevated emotions after they survived the genocidal rape and other atrocities. And these are just the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that most of the survivors were struggling with. And the second common disorder that I found in the survivors was depression. So most of the survivors, they develop depression after the genocidal rape or the atrocity they survived. So they don't want to do anything. They lack interest in doing anything, even like caring for family, caring for, I don't know, anyone who's close to them. They lack interest in doing anything. And they were mostly sad and depressed in all the week they spent. And their confidence, their everything is very low after the survival. They think that they're worthless and they don't have any hope after what they survive. And it was the second symptom that I commonly found in the survivors, is depression. And it's included in the book, the three most common disorders that the survivor was struggling with. And it also includes skills and techniques that they can cope with. The third one is anxiety. So most of the survivors, they developed anxiety after the traumatic event they survived. And this is also the most common disorder that we find after someone survives such a terrible and inhuman thing. So those three disorders was the most common one. But there was also other ones like panic attack. Most of the patients were suicidal. They had suicidal ideation. I mentioned it in the book. I think 6% of them, they attempted, but most of them, they had suicidal ideation after they survived the traumatic event. Although most of them, the suicidal ideation disappears with the support they had, the social support, the family support, the community support, and everyone. Sorry. So they were also suicidal. There are also other symptoms. I'm just mentioning only the three because they were really common. And there were psychological reactions most of the survivors were showing. It's included in the book, and we can read it after it gets launched. And socially, I don't know how to describe it because honestly, Chessie, witnessing that the social fabrics, the norms, values, and cultural things that you grow up with got really distracted. And when you see it in patients in the community, in their family, in the village you went for, you see it stopped functioning. And it was the most difficult thing even for me personally to see that the community you grow up, the country that you were told, all the social fabric that we had, the values, the norms in the culture, even religious and spiritual things that we follow, wasn't functioning because of the atrocity that not only the survivors, but also anyone who didn't survive a direct trauma were affected by it indirectly. So the first thing that I witnessed was many of the survivors, especially the survivors of the genocidal rape, their marriage didn't continue after the assault, sadly. So the women, they survived a genocidal rape. The children was watching, their children were watching, the community was watching, the member of the village was watching, and that wasn't the only thing that they struggled with. their husband, most of the husband left because they don't know what to do with the wife who survived a gang rape, who survived a public gang rape, who survived different sorts of, I don't know, characteristics that the genocide or rape brought on them. So just because they don't know, and since there are things that works in the community, most of the survivors say, for example, if they fight with their husband, they go to a religious leader, they go to, we call it shumaglis, elders who are good at counseling and everything, but no one was there. Most of the community members, they ran away, they flee, they displaced and everything. So the survivors, they couldn't talk to anyone, and no one was able to fix their marriage. So the first social impact that left on the survivor were they couldn't continue with their marriage. The husband is mostly left, and they are there out there by themselves with the children and the responsibilities and everything, with the medical and psychosocial impact the genocide are left on them. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was what the patients claim that means. The survivors claims that there was such way of coping that the community taught them when they grow up. They couldn't get that from anyone. This is just a new thing, and only few people in the whole world survive such kind of acts, and no one knows what to do when such kind of things happen. So they couldn't have anyone's help. What they call it as a cultural and traditional way of coping, they couldn't have that. For example, they say that they used to, when something happened to them, they used to have a coffee ceremony. It's just what they used to do in the community. So if you really if you have a very difficult time or anything, then you have a coffee ceremony with other women, and sorry. So what they used to do is to have a coffee ceremony with other women, and then talk about their problem, and then one neighbor will give a suggestion about, you can do this, it's okay to feel this way, you can have in such kind of thing. So they couldn't have it anymore because of economical, because of the social also. As I told you, it's just a new thing, and not any lady, not any woman can talk about what she survived, even if they have the coffee ceremony. So the second impact was the things that were helping them, the traditional and cultural things, helping the patients, it couldn't help them anymore. And it was really devastating for them, because that would have been a very helpful thing after they survive what they survive. And the third thing was the stigma and discrimination. Most of the patients, after they survive what they survive, they usually get displaced or flee. They don't want to stay in the community. So they get displaced to another area or just stay IDP camp and everything. And in the IDP camp, someone say, this is one who have been raped by a number of soldiers, number of troops. This is the one who survived a publicly gang rape. This is the one who was raped in the church and everything. So it was really very difficult for them to face also another social influence because of the genocidal rape they survived. So the stigma and the discrimination, it's pushed them to isolate themselves from anyone, from their family, from anyone close to them, even from the community in general. Even the place that they went, for example, if they are in the IDP camp, they don't connect to anyone because of the stigma and discrimination, and because of the talks that people talk. As I told you, it's a very difficult thing to hear and to talk about it. For the survivors that can provide counseling, something, so they isolate themselves from anyone who's close to them and anyone who can provide the help. So in short, these are the psychosocial impacts it left on the survivors that I've been following up. And the things that what I had been providing is, when we say psychosocial support, it's all about trying to reduce and eliminate all the impacts it caused on them, the genocide or rape, that means. So there are evidence-based skills and techniques that we have scientifically proven, which can help them with the symptoms they are struggling. So what we used to do is to provide skills and techniques which are empirically validated, that can help them cope with the symptoms they developed after the genocidal rape and other atrocities they survive. For example, if it's PTSD, there are certain kinds of skills and techniques we teach the survivor so that the symptoms can be reduced and eliminated if possible. Depression, anxiety, the same. So that's what I've been providing. And socially, we didn't really do much in the social part, because as I told you, many has displaced from their homes, many had flee, and it's really hard to find the connector of the society or the community, because most of them, like I told you, religious leaders like shemaglis, which are elders and everyone. So we couldn't involve the one who are like I don't know how to say, like an umbrella, and who can help us on that area. We were only just doing it out of the scientific ways that we can provide just a little one. Socially, connecting one survivor with another survivor who has a similar kind of traumatic experience was very helpful. Trying to remind them what they have been doing in the past as a community, like friend or as a family, that was really helpful. So the psychosocial support that we have been providing for the patients was scientific, and it was evidence-based skills and techniques, teaching the survivor so that the symptoms can be eliminated if possible, or at least reduce them. That's what I've been doing.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that as well. I mean, when you think about, as you mentioned, the impact of these attacks goes so much beyond the individual interaction, but it's the breakdown of marriages and displacement and community, and that's really the effect that sexual violence in war wants to have. It wants to distort these norms and connections and relations, and it wants to break down communities until they're as weak and divided as can be. And to do that through the medium of a woman as a battlefield, it's despicable. It's despicable. But thank you for shedding light on that, and also telling us a little bit about the evidence-based techniques that you've been employing to help these women. But for most of us, I think those of us who aren't in Tigray, and those of us who aren't even part of the Tigrayan community, I think we're all wondering, what can we do, to be part of this process of healing and be part of this process of support. So I just wondered if you could say anything to the Tigrayan diaspora and those of us who are in the West and just concerned and want to help. What can our role be? What do these survivors need from us to be part of this long-term journey that is healing, that doesn't put the emphasis on women survivors alone to go through this after everything they've been through?
Yeah. Okay. I think everyone has a role to play in helping any survivor of genocide or rape and other atrocities. And I think our role will depend on what kind of profession we have, what kind of role we can play. The person we are, everything. But generally, I believe there are two ways of helping the survivors individually, and the second one is on community, is the very important one. And like you have been mentioning it, so it's not only about the individuals per se. They weren't raped because they were females. They were raped because they were Tigrayan females, and they were raped. The perpetrators was committing the genocide rape to eradicate and destroy the community in general. So even in the solution, our focus have to be on the community-based healing processes. So I think what we can do individually is to be able to reach to any survivor who survived different of atrocity, especially the genocidal rape. If you're a psychologist and if you are in a similar field, we'll have the time for sure now, but we'll definitely have the time to be able to provide the scientific and evidence-based skills and techniques by being here. But for now, I think we can work on the training, online trainings for our professionals here, because I'm very sure that no one in Tigray, any psychologist, psychiatrist, or anyone is specialized at trauma interventions, and we're gonna need that for sure. So the first thing that the Tagarus outside or abroad, they have access now, so they can provide trainings, workshops, seminars on, any professional who's related in the field. That means So we can have our BA graduates and anyone who is in the similar field other than psychology to be trained to provide the services right now. So what we can do is to have an online or any other form, if we can have training or seminar and workshop where we can develop the capacity of the professionals we have in Tigray right now. And then we can go to the places where the survivors are and be able to provide that. That's one thing. I want to mention also we're designing a project with some foundations here in Tigray. After the book is launched, what we are thinking is 50% of the income will be straight to the survivors of the genocidal rape. So what we're trying to do is to design a project where we can serve, where we can provide a psychosocial support, economical support, and a community-based healing process. So that's what we are planning to do with some foundation and organizations we have here in Tigray. So maybe the Tagaros outside the Tigray and outside the country, I think they can support us in the project that we're planning, so as to reach to any genocidal rape survivors. So that's one thing. The one thing that I really commit myself in, that I would recommend anyone to commit themselves, is on the community-based healing process. So the first easy thing that we can do is to do an advocacy on that. The survivors, it's not their fault. We have to be able to say that it wasn't their fault, and all the stigma and discrimination has to be eliminated, and we have to give all the support that we can provide for any survivors of the genocidal rape. And the other thing that we are faced with right now is, I believe, the generation by itself, the whole generation, all of us who survive direct or indirect trauma, I think we're the generation who survive genocide in general. So I think we have to be able to work on the community-based healing processes wherever we are. And this is what I believe in, because since we all survived the genocide that was committed and are still committing in Tigray, we have to put our hands together, help each other in any way we can, and be able to be there for the people who are in most in need. The only thing I can say right now is, because that's the only thing that I have in my hand, the project that we are planning. So we will be working on the project. We're only designing it right now because the book is not even launched. So we'll be looking for partners. We'll be looking for anyone who can help professionally, financially, in any way, so that we can reach to the survivors individually and in a community-based way also. I think we will find a way to let you know, to keep you updated about the project, the book, everything. But we're gonna need so much help on that, so that we can reach to the survivors and their multidimensional needs that they require. It's not only psychosocial. Most of them are still surviving and struggling with medical impact. And I want to mention this because the project that we are designing, I mean, if you see it, there is less chance of, doing it, because there's the blockage and everything. We don't have the finance, we don't have anything. The reason we're doing it is we have survivors who came to IDER, and they say that they have a vaginal discharge, they have this medical complication they're struggling with. They cannot work, they cannot even walk, because there is this smell that it creates, and they cannot even sit beside their children's. What you hear really is, I don't know how to say it, it's really devastating. And we're designing this project not because we have everything, we have nothing. Practically, we have nothing. But if you can have the support of the Tagaru diaspora, if we can have the support of anyone in the whole world, trauma intervention community, and anyone, we can be able to address also the medical support that these women, children, and adolescents. So it's not only psychosocial support, it's also medical, it's also financial and everything. So there's this need, and we're just planning and designing the project. Maybe the Tagaro diasporas, anyone in the trauma intervention can help also on that one. So we can have the project profile after we have the design. We can share it with anyone who's interested to help.
Thank you so much, Feven. I think there will be lots of people who are interested to help. Please keep us updated as much as you can on the progress with the book. anything that we can do to support you in this process. What a important episode for International Women's Day. And I just want to say to our audience, I know it's not always easy to engage with these stories, but it is actually a part of the process of validating them and recognizing the trauma that they've been through, to sit and to hear them. And that's part of what we can do. That's a very small way that we can be part of the healing process, is to listen to episodes like this and engage with the true lived experiences of those women in Tigray. So thank you so much, Feven, for bringing that to us. And we hope that we can see you again. And we're all thinking of you, and please stay safe.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you, Chessie.